Walking a path along the roots of Pikes Peak, you take a fork in the road toward the Anselm Society digital pub. Inside is a raucous conversation on the arts, faith, and nicknames, for good or ill. In the corner table by the fire are two people. One of them is recalling her own litany of nicknames over the years. Brace Face, Four Eyes, Thunder Thighs, Mandible, Mandinka. That's me, your co-host, Mandy Huck. Welcome to Believe to See, a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. Here at Believe to See, we explore the relationship between faith, art, and storytelling. Our goal is to connect the great story, the great stories, and our own stories so that we can better understand what it means to live with a Christian imagination. Now, today, I'm very excited to be talking with a very good friend of mine who, good, faithful podcast listeners that you are, you will have heard of her before because we spoke with her in December of 2023. So Jennifer Layte, aka Jenn, speaking of nicknames, is an author, chaplain, spiritual director, and pastor of a small historic church in central Massachusetts. She also founded The Pilgrimage, a Jesus-centered online spiritual formation community, which is mostly what we talked about when we talked about in December, though we covered other things like Lectio Divina and things like that. So Jenn wears lots and lots of hats, but today we're going to focus on her author chapeau. Hello, Jenn. So good to have you.
Hi, thanks for having me back.
Yeah, so exciting. This is really just an excuse to get to talk to you as my friend, because we are friends.
Yay, and it's been a while.
In real life.
That's right.
Although, I guess we've never seen each other in person, but whatever.
No, but one of these days it will happen.
One day. I mean, I'm always down coming to Massachusetts. I will come to Massachusetts.
You are welcome. We have room. And also, This place I'm staying is very lovely.
Yeah, because you're on a personal retreat right now in Massachusetts, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of author hats, you have published two books, both novels.
Three, actually.
Three.
Oh, two before this one.
Before this one. This one isn't out yet, although it might be when this.
Well, it is, but it isn't.
It is and it isn't. It's,
Right.
But anyway, so your two books that you published previously are Trees and the Pavement and Favored One. And you're about to release your third, which by the time this is, we're recording this in March, but by the time this is released, your book will probably be out in the wild as well. I know you have boxes of it.
I do.
Yes, and it is called...
I have so many boxes.
Yeah, you had a flat. I saw that. You had an actual... Yeah, that was very exciting. Okay, so your book is called Follower, How Getting Close to Jesus Brings You to Yourself. So when you sent me the first chapter, I was like, I expected it to be another novel. And then I was like, wait, a subtitle. Maybe it's not a novel. So how about you tell us, how is this one different from your other two, your first two books?
Good question. I think it's probably more similar to the second book than the first book. All three of them are somewhat different from each other. Although my first two books have green covers and my last two books both begin with F. And so I find myself getting confused. It's not good planning on my part. Anyway, the first book I wrote in my 30s. I was single. I was somewhat recently back from missions work with refugees in the UK. And so it is a children's novella about refugees in the UK. I feel like the topic is still quite current, even though the particular political situation that is the backdrop for that story is not current. Unfortunately, there are always these situations.
Yes.
So I do think that because I was younger and in a different stage of life, the way that I express things in that book is a little different than I would now. But I don't think my views overall have changed particularly much, and I still think it's a good story. So, and it's been out since 2008. So there are a limited number of unsold copies left in the world. When they
Okay.
sell, it will be out of print. And so you are welcome to buy some from me. They're not expensive.
Yeah, I actually have one. I just realized
forgot.
I put it in my to read cabinet where it has languished. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
This is terrible. I'm
You
admitting
at
to
least
it.
you have it.
I do.
You have
I
it.
own it. I'm special.
That's good. Yes. So special.
And it's Trees in the Pavement is
Yes.
what it's called. So
Yes.
yeah, okay. So that one's like a pure novella,
Yep.
fictionalized completely, right?
Yes.
But then the second one, favored
so the second one
yes,
is technically, I think you could call it biblical fiction.
okay,
If you needed to call it something. It is a novel about Mary, the mother of Jesus, or as she is in the book, Miriam, the mother of Yeshua. I chose transliterated Hebrew names because I feel like these stories are either gospel stories are either so familiar to people that we come to them with our own assumptions and have a real hard time being open to another slant, or like,
right.
oh, maybe it was really like this, or maybe I would have felt like that too. The familiar names, I think, can maybe hold us back.
Yeah,
So
it's like they're held at it. Well, it's almost like I find myself, I don't like it when I find myself saying biblical characters because I think
I say that all the
that's,
time,
I
but I
know
agree.
we all do. We all say it. We've probably already said it in this podcast.
Yeah,
I wasn't
probably.
paying attention, but it just reminded
Right.
me that a lot of times I catch myself saying Bible characters or biblical characters.
Mm-hmm.
And it's easy to do that. And in a way where we're detaching ourselves from them and forgetting that they were actual people, not characters
Right.
in the way
Right.
that a fictional
Right.
character would be.
Yeah.
And so I think
So
renaming them, because really that's more accurate, right? Like she would have been
yeah,
called
she
Miriam.
was. Yeah,
Right,
they were Jewish,
right,
so they had Hebrew names.
right. Jesus was
Yeah.
A Greek name, right? And he was never called that, right?
Right. It was called Yeshua.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So that's partly why the downside to doing that is that, well, so from a reader's perspective, a lot of people come to me and they're like, why did you do that? Because I spend all my time trying to figure out which Bible person you're talking about. And I'm like, maybe just don't try to do that.
maybe just
and
relax.
and just read the story like a story. I mean, if you were going to read a fantasy novel, they would have all weird names too, and you wouldn't be trying to like whatever, or a
Yeah.
Russian novel.
Yep.
Anyway, but the other downside is I can't read it aloud because I can't pronounce all the names that I use.
Oh, that's a fun
So
problem.
someone was like, would you make an audiobook? And I was like, well, not me personally. If I could find someone that knew how to say those names, then
Calling all Hebrew scholars.
there
Let
you
us
go.
know.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Anyway, so those are some of the weird distinctives of it. But
Right.
I wrote that book I think I have encountered people struggling to call it a novel, even though there's plenty of other biblical fiction out there. And I think it's because I wrote it as if I wasn't trying to, I didn't do a ton of research into like Mary legends or anything like that. I did a little of that, but mostly I thought I kind of Lectio Divina / imaginative reading it. And thought, well, if I were her and I had this remarkable son, how would I respond to these things that are happening around me that
Right.
he's doing, that I'm, and so I don't know if there's something about my having written it that way that makes it, because it's very like the reactions are very visceral because they're actually reactions that I myself am having as I'm imagining myself experiencing these things. So I think something about that highlights to people that I'm telling a story about real people, so not
Right.
characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and so then they're like, so that it's a novel, but it's not fiction,
Right.
but it is fiction because I like imagined most of it. We don't have that much information in the Bible about Mary or Miriam,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, so it's hard to classify, but I
Right.
guess
So it's
technically it is.
novelized, I guess.
Yeah,
Maybe. I don't know.
sure. I don't know
Um,
either.
but so those two, that your first two are similar in that they are both novelized, or they read like a novel, like a narrative.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then this one, Follower, I was expecting it to be like Favored One, which I have read and love and
Right.
own and all that. So I was expecting it to be
Mm-hmm.
like Favored One, but in this we are treating Simon Peter. And so I
Correct.
expected it to be like Favored One, but with Peter, but
Oh, with
you did
Peter.
it a little differently this time. So
Yes.
how is this one structured?
So this one, I mean, I sort of probably got into the story in a similar way, but True Confessions, which I don't reveal in the book until the very end, but spoiler. These were most of the chapters in this book were originally sermons.
Okay.
So I became a pastor in 2019 and I preach. I always have way more to say than I can say in one Sunday.
Hmm.
And so I always preach sermon series. And so my third sermon series was a narrative series on Simon Peter. Um,
Okay.
and I just loved that series. Um, it was really fun and enlightening to prepare.
Oh, that's great.
It was really fun to tell the stories. I discovered things that, I mean, those stories are so familiar, but I discovered things when like really looking into their depths that I would have never, that I had never seen before. Like, I cannot wait for you to read the chapter about his denials.
I'm
I
excited.
have a
Okay.
whole new take that I'm absolutely convinced about
Okay.
what he was actually afraid of and why he denied Jesus.
Ooh,
Um,
that's exciting.
that I,
Okay.
yeah. So, um,
S-
so that's basically what happened. Then I took a writer's workshop with Ruth Buchanan.
mhm.
She runs the Storytellers Network. It's great.
Yeah, we need to
And
have her on here.
yeah, you should.
Yeah.
That's a great idea.
Mhm.
Um, anyway, so she helped me kind of, my voice is fairly informal. And I was kind of like, I don't know if I know how to write a nonfiction book. And I don't know if this is too informal.
Okay.
And she was like, well, you have an interesting way of framing things, but I don't think it's bad. So, so I
No,
just went with it.
I mean, yeah, you sent me because the book, I mean, you have
Mm-hmm.
it in your hands, but I don't have, I think it's in the mail right now. Pretty
Yours
sure.
is in the mail. Yeah.
Yay! But you did send me a preview of the first, you sent me the first chapter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your style is conversational, which I enjoy. I
Yes.
don't think nonfiction books need to sound scholarly
Right.
necessarily. You have the research backing because of your background as spiritual director and a chaplain and a pastor, but then you also have the
Mm-hmm.
literary background. And so I think those things go together nicely. But what comes through in your voice is your heart, because
Yay.
ultimately, um, what I see when I look at all of the different hats you wear, the way they're united is that you really do believe, as we do at Anselm, that digging into our story and seeing it in context with the great stories,
Mm-hmm.
biblical and otherwise,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Lord of the Rings, Narnia,
Yeah.
Brothers
Right.
Karamazov, all the great stories.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Truth is God's truth. And
Right.
it points us to not only who God is, but who we are in
Yes.
his story. And so I feel like that's so, in a way, like you were intimating, it is similar to Favored One in a lot of ways because you're exploring the story of this real
Mm-hmm.
person who existed, but
Yeah.
you're just treating it a little bit differently. You are going into the narrative, but you're not just telling the narrative, you're
Right.
addressing it in ways. like that a
I'm
nonfiction book would.
That's right.
Yeah.
I'm expositing maybe
Yeah.
a little bit
Mm-hmm.
informally, but still like I'm pointing to the things I want you to notice instead
Right.
of just letting you figure it out and maybe not figuring it
Right.
out.
Right. Yeah. So knowing you as I do, I know, I was going to say I'm guessing, but I know that as you're writing, you're thinking about the reader and
Yes.
the journey you're taking them on. So did that inform the way that you chose to structure the book? Like, what were you hoping?
I think it kind of did as I was writing it, but even more as I was trying to figure out how to publish it.
Hmm.
Because and it's real funny because I wrote it for a particular church congregation that I minister in, which is very tiny, and the community that I pastor in is extremely economically, educationally, financially challenged.
Okay.
Um, and so, and tends to be politically conservative and generally speaking, theologically conservative, even though they have a woman pastor, so not too theologically conservative, I guess.
Right.
Um, um, and I mean, there's some variation in there, but that's the majority of the people in the community and in the church itself. And so, but I think when I decided to write this as a book, I was thinking more in terms of the broader community I serve on the internet through the pilgrimage. And those people tend to be, well, maybe the financial piece is similar, but everything else is the opposite.
Right.
And I think at first I wasn't sure if I could do the crossover, but I didn't really need to change too much about the message, I don't think.
Hmm.
Um, and structuring it was easy because I already had the sermons for most of the chapters. There are 2 chapters in there that I wrote from scratch that were not part of the original sermons.
Okay.
But it was already kind of structured. I already knew that it was an exploration kind of stages of faith indirectly.
Mm.
And so I, that part was almost preset.
Hmm.
But then when it got to trying to pitch it to agents and publishers and things like that, I had to really decide, what do I want this to be? Um,
Hmm.
and the closest I got to a traditional publishing deal was a publisher that said, this is great. We love that it's a character profile. Not everybody loved that, but but they liked it. Um, and people are really into that right now with things like The Chosen and everything.
Right.
Um, but can you make it a little less narrative and a little bit more analysis? And I was like, I
No.
reread the whole thing, and then I had some early readers who they read it for me and gave me feedback, and then I was like, I'm gonna just keep talking to you guys.
Yeah.
I got them all together on a Zoom call once. They didn't know each other, but I was just like, I
Now
need
they
some
do.
help. You got it right.
Yeah.
I'm like, you guys got to help me figure this out. Um, and I was like, can I make these changes? And some of them said, absolutely don't do it. And some of them said you could, but it wouldn't be the same book.
Right. Yeah. And
And so,
that goes
and
to
I
the
thought, you
heart.
know what? I don't
Hmm.
want to write the same book as other people.
No,
Like,
thank you. That is such a struggle as an artist. And most of our listeners, I think, are artists. They're at least consumers of art, but we have a lot of obviously Anselmers, the guild members that I'm sure they're all nodding right now. Cause like, what is the point of
mhm.
making art that can be way too easily compared, like not even
Right.
compared, but just can overlay with something else? Like why
Yeah,
would we not want to
exactly.
make something different? And
Exactly. I mean,
especially
we have
mhm.
I was just going to say, yes, we have comps. I remember your episode about comps.
Oh yeah,
Um,
you have to
you
have
need to have
comps,
those, I guess. I guess you have to, but
right?
you're not. Even a publisher doesn't want you to write the same book that they just published.
Right. Well, I
So
know, like that actually, I think one of my rejections was because they had something like sometimes you
so
get rejected
similar.
because they are
Yeah.
already have published something that was like, because my book right now is set in the 20s. They can't go
Okay.
publish two books set in the 20s. Like, so the overlap is like a negative, but then they expect it to overlap so they can categorize it. And so it's a whole thing. But for you, like your whole life is about story. So I wouldn't want in your ministry, like that's how your heart
Hmm.
beats. And I
Yeah.
I'm glad you chose not to change it that way because like in the chapter you sent me, this sentence caught my eye. It's quote, stories are, after all, how we humans learn best. Maybe that's because stories are who we are, unquote. I wanted to hear more about that. Can you expand on what you mean by that?
So I think of course, there is variation in this with learning style and blah, blah, blah. But when human beings, everything that we live turns into a story. It might be a boring story or a painful story, but we naturally think of things in terms of story. When you get home from work at the end of the day or whatever, or when your kid comes home from school and you're like, hey, how was school? And then they have, well, if it was me, I used to say fine, and my mom would be like, what did you do? And I would be like, school.
I
But
don't know.
I don't know. But what she was asking for was stories. And eventually I figured, you figure that out and you learn how to talk about your day and yourself and the things that happen to you. And everybody does it. And so it's one of those things that is endemic to who we are and not a thing that we're necessarily conscious of, like breathing.
Yeah.
um, and so you can and should go to school or trade school or college or things where you are intentionally learning things in a structured way. Um, but the things that, I mean, do I remember any of the actual class periods that I sat through in college? Maybe one or two in 4 years. But I for sure remember the shenanigans I got up to with my friends and how I learned and grew as a person in a group of people that was different from the ones I had grown up with. And so I think that's what I mean is we're not necessarily intellectually learning through story all the time, but we're a whole person learning.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So I think and this is why good literature matters, because we see ourselves in those stories and then we can, it's not like you have to sit and think, how do I apply this? I'm reading Dostoevsky.
Mm.
I don't know these people, but
Right.
I like Alyosha, or I really don't like the dad, or
Right.
or whatever, because we know people like these people, even if we don't really, and
Right.
so we can connect our lives, and we don't have to think, "What am I learning from this story?" We just are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like it I was trying to think of an analogy and it's like when you're eating, you don't have to think about what all the nutrients, you don't have to think about where
Yeah,
they're
right.
how they're going to help your
Yeah,
body. You just take them in and they do their
great.
thing.
Yes, great analogy. Yes, perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, there was a little story that I put in that chapter originally, and that was in the original sermon, and I ended up taking it out because it didn't feel like it fit in the book very well. But there was a woman that I was in a Bible study with once, and she told us this story about her precocious 5-year old nephew or whatever, or I guess he was 7 at the time. Um, And at the end of his school year, his teacher asked him, what did you, or his mom asked him, what did you learn this year? And he said, I didn't learn anything. I learned everything last year in first grade. Because in first grade, he was conscious of all the new things he was learning. But by second grade, he had internalized it all. And so he was more organically learning stuff without even being aware of it.
Oh, that's really funny. So first grade, it was like memorization and charts and handwriting,
And learning
probably.
how to read and yeah.
Hmm. I
Yeah,
love
but by
that.
second grade, he already knew how to read and
Yeah.
he already knew math,
Yeah.
so of course he was much better at all those things, but he wasn't perceiving that.
I love that. I love that. That's interesting. Um, yeah. And another quote that you said, I'm just going to quote you to you. That's what we're doing
Okay.
here. Um, you said, when many people hear or say the word story, they think fiction or not true or even lie. And that's not what story in its truest sense necessarily means. Some stories are fiction, some are nonfiction. Both kinds can be a way of telling the truth. And I just, that resonated with me so much because as a story freak and Anselmi, like it really just gets to the heart of things. It's almost like story gets around it. It engages the intellect,
Mm-hmm.
but at the same time, it gets around the intellect if it's a good story, well
Mm-hmm.
told, and gets
Mm-hmm.
to the heart. I mean, if you think about it, Jesus mostly spoke in parables when he was
Right.
really making
Yep.
huge points. And so if Jesus likes story, then heck, I'll I'll
Agree.
I'll admit to liking story too.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
the parables are an excellent example of that fiction telling the truth.
Hmm.
Um, and it's fun to watch people's brains people who are not necessarily tuned into, for lack of a better term, the mechanics of story,
Hmm.
um, telling them that, you know, fiction is a way of telling the truth too. And then them being like, what? And then using Jesus parables as an example if they're, if they're churchgoers and watching them be like, uh,
Right.
it's,
The
I can't,
the light
yeah,
bulb
right.
comes on.
Yep.
Oh, that's funny. Yeah. Um, so at this point, I don't know how much attention the viewers pay to the opening spiel jokes, but if they do, they might be wondering by now why I talked about nicknames.
Mm.
And it is
I was,
because,
I just want to say that was real
yeah,
brave of you to put all of those nicknames
I know.
out into the world.
I don't know if you saw me pause right before I admitted to Thunder Thighs. I don't know.
Yeah,
Maybe we can
I
edit that
saw
one
that.
out. No, that was a very specific young man at school who would call me that. And here's a little
Rude.
anecdote since we like story. He uh, made the mistake of cheating off my math quiz one
Mm.
time.
Mm.
And then we got the grade back and realized I was the wrong person to be cheating off of. That's the end of that story. He actually got mad at me because he
That's
got a bad grade. And I'm like, dude, I
yep.
never told you that you should have cheated off me, okay?
That's great.
Anyway, it was
My
funny.
word.
He got what he deserved. But anyway,
That's for sure.
yeah. So yes, I do. I'm for whatever reason, people like to nickname me. And so I've gotten nicknames. They weren't all mean. Most of them were funnier. Like actually Mandible, because that means jawbone. The
Mm.
guys, it was these two guys in college that started calling me Mandible, and they ended up shortening it to JB because jawbone. And it
So
was the funniest thing because anyone who would hear them calling me JB, they'd be like, what? And
yeah,
none of
right.
we wouldn't tell them why. So
Yeah, there you
anyway,
go.
but that's why I was also JB. I've also been Scooter because somebody said I look like the Muppet Scooter, which is not a
What?
compliment. I don't know.
Also, not true.
I used to wear glasses. It's fine. But
Mm.
anyway, all that. Okay. We need to get off the Mandy nickname road because we could be here for a while. But the reason I brought that up is because your first chapter, at least when I got it, and I know
Mhm.
so is it still called A New Job and a New Name?
Yes.
Okay. Because I know it changed a little after you sent it to me. But we Anselmers are we've had several discussions about naming. We've had them on the podcast. We have them at guild meetings all the time. We even have a chapter in our own guild book, Why We Create. Or I guess that's more the society as a whole. That's our book, not just the guild. And it focuses on names. So I would like to hear more from you about this concept of naming and renaming. Like, all of our listeners know that Peter wasn't always Peter. So
Right.
talk about that a little for us.
So you will be pleased to discover that this thread continues through the book, the naming
Oh, the
thing.
thread of naming and renaming. Good. Okay.
Yes. But it is, I mean, I think in biblical times and even today in some cultures, and sometimes even in ours, our dominant American culture,
Mhm.
um, names and identity can be really closely linked. And sometimes people choose to change their own names for significant to them reasons.
Mhm.
And so I think names, I would hazard a guess that most people find something significant about names. And I do think that Jesus, he renames Peter, but he also gives James and John a nickname. And then I make this point in the book, John, they had to share it. So John renames himself, the disciple that Jesus loved.
Oh, that's a
Um,
good point, because he's like, I don't want to be a plural. I'm an
yeah,
individual
I'm,
too.
that's right.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe someday I'll do a book about him. But anyway, so I do think that Jesus is saying something specific about Peter's identity by giving him that name, including he says, "You will be called Peter."
Hmm.
He doesn't say, I'm just gonna call you Pete." Like,
Hmm.
you know. Um, so a lot of the plot, if you want to call it that, line in this book is sort of watching the transition from Simon to Peter.
Hmm.
Um, but I do think I mean, the book is called How Getting Close to Jesus Brings You to Yourself.
Hmm.
And so that's sort of the idea that Jesus is really the one who gets to name us.
Hmm.
He's the one who gets to call out who and what we are. And um, when he does that, we become more who and what we were created to be.
Yeah, and I think that's what, especially the way you just said that, he calls out who we are, and it's when he renames people, nicknames them or whatever in the Bible,
Mhm.
um, he chooses a name that they typically don't agree with at first or understand fully.
Mhm.
So it's a prophetic naming. He's and prophetic in both ways, because you have the forthtelling and the foretelling. The
Mhm.
right. So
Mhm.
being the prophet, the aspect of the prophet that says what's true, and the aspect of the prophet that says what's coming
To come,
to
yeah.
come. Right. And so in that way, when Jesus gives someone a nickname, he's picking out something that they might not even realize is true, and he's saying you're going to see why this is the right name for you
Mhm.
down the road,
Mhm.
you
Mhm.
know? And it's funny, the author Brennan Manning actually talks in several of his books about um, he asked Jesus in prayer what his nickname is. And
Oh, interesting.
and he was
I
told
have
what
done
it,
that too.
I have too, because of Brennan Manning, because Brennan
Okay.
Manning said to. So I said, yes, sir. But the interesting thing is he never reveals what it is. It's private. He
Mm.
never
Mhm.
tells, he doesn't, it's not in any of his writing. And I'm
Mhm.
pretty sure I don't think he ever shared it verbally with
Mhm.
anyone in his life either, because it's his own personal nickname from Jesus. But I love that intimacy
Yeah.
of the intimacy and the authority that the
Mhm.
renaming reveals about Jesus at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the other phrase in the chapter title is a new job, because Peter
Yes.
had a job. And I like how in
Right.
the narrative of the first chapter, you talk about, you were like, has anyone ever come to your job site and told you how to do your job? And you're like, hey, step off. No, you didn't say that. You're not quite that
No,
informal.
I have, right. I have had that experience numerous
I
times.
think
And
we all
so
have.
I was writing from, I suspect so. So I was writing from a very, a place of deep experience in
Well,
that
and
moment.
I would venture to guess that pastors have that maybe more than a lot of others, because you're doing your job in front of however many people are in your
Hmm.
congregation. And probably,
Yeah.
I would venture to say, probably weekly, you get a little feedback for good or ill on
Yeah. Both pastors
the way you just sighed.
and baristas,
And
which I
baristas.
have been both of those things. So yeah, I tend to get, and as a recovering people pleasing codependent, that's real tough.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, you put yourself out there on the high wire as a people pleasing codependent to be like, I'm
Yeah.
going to teach you people every week.
Yep.
What do you think now? Yeah, no.
Right.
Yeah, my daughter Bethany was a barista, and she can
Oh yeah.
attest to
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So, and I was a teacher, so yeah, we're
Hmm.
putting ourselves out there. But anyway, I'm sure all the listeners are sitting there remembering now times that they've been told how to do their job and how they felt about that. And that's what Jesus did, but it's okay because it's Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, so he comes along, and that's his first interaction with Peter, the professional fisherman. But yeah, expand on how did you talk about that in the book? Why did you talk about that?
So um, maybe because I think we sometimes have that, like, well, it's okay because Jesus did it,
Right.
right? And like maybe Peter wasn't totally okay because the first part of that story, he's cleaning up. He's like put everything away.
Hmm.
He is done. He didn't catch anything. I'm sure he doesn't want to. He's probably hangry. He doesn't want to go like back out on the boat for some dude that he just met who probably said some great things from his boat, but he wasn't paying attention because he was putting the nets back up. And um, and this guy doesn't know anything about fishing. Like, why? Mm.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. You do wonder like how much what his he obviously he did what Jesus said,
yeah, he
and
did it.
he was compelled to do
I mean, he
so, but
says in the chapter, I have him. I say, he's pretty restrained if you think
mhm,
about it. Um, and but he does get a little passive aggressive, maybe depending on how you read the tone. He says,
mhm,
"But because you say so." Like,
right.
we were out all night, we didn't catch anything, but because you say so, sure,
Sure.
okay. Like,
Right. And so but the new job, like what, so do you feel like, is that a parallel, like the new name and the new job, just that
yeah, I think
yeah.
so. I mean, it's a new job in the sense that now he's not fishing for fish anymore. He's fishing
Hmm.
for people. Jesus takes his original job and reframes it.
Hmm.
And
Makes it
so,
something infinitely harder.
yeah.
And yet he has proven he will equip him,
Yes.
because he showed him how he could do it with his worldly job of fishing
Right.
for
That's
fish.
right.
Yeah.
That's right.
It's like, look what you can do through me, and in obedience to me.
Right.
Um,
Oh man.
yeah.
I can't, I mean, this is just the first chapter we're talking about. I can't wait for you to read the rest of this.
I'm excited.
The themes keep resurfacing,
Okay.
and yeah.
I mean, that's how
So,
good story works, whether,
yeah.
in our own lives and our narrative
Hmm.
in our own lives, that's kind of, we bump into
Yeah.
the same themes over and over again.
Right.
Um, so, which brings me back to names. At the end of the first chapter, you encourage the reader, just like Brennan Manning.
Yeah.
Um,
I haven't read Brennan Manning. I
okay,
didn't
you
know
have
he
to
did
read
that.
Yeah, so the relentless tenderness of Jesus. He's most famous for Ragamuffin Gospel, which I
Mm.
mean, hey, just read Brennan Manning. Anyway, but just like Brennan Manning, you encourage the reader to ask Jesus if he has a nickname for them. And I like that, by the way, that at the end of the chapter, what did you call it? Focus time or something. I'm not remembering.
Follow more
Following
closely.
closer. Following or however.
That's
Yeah.
one of the things that got changed
Oh,
because
okay.
the grammar was bad. I knew the grammar was bad on that, but
Okay.
the editor said, "Can you fix the grammar here?"
Yeah. Okay. So the chapters will close. Each chapter closes with a following more closely action item and encouraging
Yes.
the reader to experience something along the lines of what Peter did in the chapter. So,
Yes.
so in this, you encourage the reader to ask Jesus if he has a nickname for them. And this is one of those assignments that um, makes me nervous. I don't know, because
Mhm.
there's that feeling like, okay, but what if I don't hear anything? Like, what does that mean? Does that mean Jesus doesn't want to talk to me or he's not listening to me? How would you encourage a reader to just go for that anyway?
I would say, go for it anyway. Um,
That's a good,
I would
yeah.
say be patient.
Okay.
I actually put that prompt in a Bible study that I wrote for the pilgrimage years ago on the Gospel of John,
Okay.
because another guy with a nickname. And
Hmm.
um, some of those I've done that Bible study multiple times with varied, extremely different groups of people. Um, and one of the groups, the most recent one, I think, was from my church during COVID, during lockdown. So we were doing it online, and we had a new person in the group, and she said, I kind of posed the question, and in a live group setting, nobody ever comes up with an answer unless it's like a joke,
Right.
like the donkey, whatever. um, but this woman said, "What's Jesus' nickname for you, Jen?" And I was like, I haven't actually asked myself that question. And then I got nervous like you.
Yeah.
Um, and so I have taken it a few times and asked Jesus that question. And finally, actually, after, because you remember talking about nicknames and stepping into the story too,
I
right?
do, because I did your stepping into the story online
Class.
journey, which was
Yes. Right.
incredible. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Well,
Anyway,
awesome.
yes.
Thanks. Anyway, so it was after one of those exercises and after the feedback exercise in that class,
Hmm.
and I was just really wrestling with something in the aftermath of that with that particular cohort, and all of a sudden Jesus gave me my nickname.
Hmm.
Um, but it was actually while I was reading a Bible passage that had nothing to do with what I was wrestling with. It was just like my brain was open to the concept and
Ah,
I was doing other things. And then it was like, oh, there it is.
it
That's it.
downloaded.
Right. So I
Yeah,
think for that particular action prompt, do it and then walk away and do something else.
right.
And if you're open to that question hanging there between you and Jesus, he'll let you know what it
Yeah.
is
I think that's really good
when you're
counsel.
ready.
Yeah. Because for me, I have asked him in different contexts in different ways. One from you, but another time I was doing a listening prayer at a women's
Mm-hmm,
retreat a few
mm-hmm,
years ago, which I felt very uncomfortable with. I had never done that listening prayer,
mm,
which that's really sad. How, but that's our nature, and fortunately, God knows that when we pray, typically we're just going to unload on Him instead of listening. But the nickname He gave me has been reaffirmed
mm.
several other times, and I'm not going to tell it. So there you go.
I have told people mine. I'm not as
Yeah,
holy as Brennan Manning.
yeah,
I
yeah,
have told people mine multiple
yeah.
times, but
I have told people I'm just not going to put it out there on the
yeah.
yeah. It's not
Yeah.
Minerva or anything. But anyway, but but it is something that I did not get an immediate response
Mm,
necessarily. Um but I did know that he was listening. And I think one of the beautiful things about the way that you have written Favored One, which I have read and which I can see how you have written this one, Follower, is the way that you invite readers into the story of these real Bible people, and you remind us that these are real people. Not only that, but we can walk alongside them as peers because we have the same Jesus they had.
That's right.
And the way that engaging with story, biblical or otherwise, but in this case, biblical especially, engaging with other people's stories will always show us something about ourselves. And in particular, it will show us who we are to Jesus and invite us to learn even more. And so I think that's why this book just, when I saw you with your Kickstarter and everything, I was like, this is such an Anselmy book. We have to talk about this. So I just appreciate that you've invited us into yet another Bible person, not character, Bible person's story, their narrative, and how just what a beautiful place we can arrive, where we can arrive. Boy, I'm jumbling all my words, but that's why we're writers. We're better at writing than talking, right? Hopefully. So anyway, I really appreciate your time today. And I appreciate that you do what God asks you to do and you write stories.
Thanks for having me here.
Yeah.
It's really nice to chat again.
So yes, it is. And one day we'll do it in person.
Yep.
So Boston is the only big city I like. So I might as well get there.
Oh, well, you should. Although I'm not really anywhere near there, but.
Well, you're nearer than I am. So if I get there, you better
true.
get there.
That is for sure.
It's only fair. Anyway.
Yes, you're right.
Well, I'm sure you can tell things are winding down here at the Anselm Society Digital Pub. The fire is down to embers, the customers are trundling home, and you have polished off your final glass. Once again, Believe to See is a podcast of the Anselm Society Arts Guild. If you have a minute, we'd love for you to rate and review the show on Spotify, iTunes, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.